Hello and welcome again to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. Something, or not something, the thing I'm going to attempt to do today is talk about why I will note, or a part of the reason that I will note, that taking early osteopathic claims at face value with respect to accuracy with what they worked on and what they did has challenges. So I've spoken about, to some degree, the way that Dr. Still talked about his own accuracy, and he noted that he didn't pay a ton of attention to dates and specific times and specific things. He didn't really write them down just off the top of his head, and not entirely off the top of his head. That's not fair, but the degree to which things were likely exceptionally accurate is questionable. So I'm going to speak about something I've spoken about in the past and I wrote about with Jason Haxton, published that on a website quite some time ago. So I will read from that to show how that may synthesize. But the specific thing that I want to talk about is something I heard a decent amount about early on in my osteopathic education, my osteopathic career, was the Spanish flu. So specifically, how osteopathy had high levels of success with the Spanish flu, and the claim that it was about the hands-on treatment. So it was about the actual manual methods applied. So I'm going to go through a little bit of stuff, not a ton. Now, the counter to what I'm doing right here is, say, the majority of stuff that you would read on osteopathy and the Spanish flu would likely say positive things. It would say that hands-on osteopathy did fantastic stuff, had really good results. I'll show you why there's at least minor issues with that, or I'll at least attempt to speak in that direction. And it may not necessarily line up with what's written most frequently, but what's written most frequently has some challenges to it. But anyways, instead of wasting your time waxing poetic about that, I'm going to go through the stuff that I said I was going to go through. So the first paper that ends up pointing in the direction that I'm pointing in, which says that at least on some level, the information around the claims of osteopathy and the Spanish flu might not be as accurate as one would want, is a paper called Osteopathic Manipulative Treatment and the Spanish Flu, a Historical Literature Review. The main author, or the first listed author, is Francesca Baroni. The final author is Jason Haxton, who, when I read from what I wrote, it was in concert or in partnership with Haxton. Jason Haxton is the head of the Museum of Osteopathic History at the Andrew Taylor Still University, at Andrew Taylor Still University, which houses the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, or one might say that the American School of Osteopathy turned into the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine, turned into Andrew Taylor Still University. Anyways, so the paper, again, the name, Osteopathic Manipulative Treatment and the Spanish Flu, a Historical Literature Review. So this is from the abstract. The conclusion. Conclusions from the study are limited by the historical and descriptive nature of the data gathered, which lacked the rigor of modern-day scientific studies. However, this review could lead to future research inquiries on the effectiveness of these approaches. Osteopathic physicians and osteopaths should embrace their historical osteopathic heritage by continuing the work of our predecessors and combining their hands-on experience and osteopathic principles with modern medical treatment and rigorous scientific standards. So what I will say is that this paper did its best to identify the actual hands-on methods, and when you read through the source material, it's not easy to do. So they had their work cut out for them, and they painted it in a generally positive light, which is fine. That's their business. But the first line, conclusions from this study are limited by the historical and descriptive nature of the data gathered. Right. So the data that is available to us shouldn't even necessarily be called data in the colloquial sense. So it is not descriptive numbers. It is not collected numbers. It's not rigorously categorized. It's stories and people saying, I saw this many people and this many people got better and whatever, right? So it's not appropriately descriptive. It's not reasonable to suggest that the numbers are as accurate as one would want, and there was no meaningful oversight to how they were collected. So simply put, there's a problem with them. Okay, to then go on to another paper. And before I do that, what I will note is that most complementary and alternative healthcare practices claim that they had really good results with the Spanish flu, and they compare that to their claims of what happened with your standard allopathic physician or your medical doctor. What I have heard, and I did not source this properly, so I can't confirm its veracity, but there may be something, I believe it's aspirin, because aspirin was relatively recently available when the Spanish flu showed up, and there is some commentary that I've heard that aspirin may have been overprescribed, and that may have caused some of the challenges that were noted with the Spanish flu. I'm not sure about that, but it is something that I've heard and something that anybody could follow up on if they like, but don't trust me on it. Take that with a lot of caution. Anyways, to read another from another study, the title is Avian Influenza, an Osteopathic Component to Treatment. This is from 2007. So the previous paper, let me do that first. The previous paper is from 2021. So it was January 26, 2021. This second paper, to again read the title, Avian Influenza, an Osteopathic Component to Treatment, published July 9th, 2007. So to read from the abstract, these were not, or no, this isn't from the abstract. This is actually from the body of the paper. Anyways, to read. These were not controlled studies. The data is retrospective and some conclusions cannot be well drawn from such information. For example, it is not known whether the population of patients treated by DOs was comparable to the population treated by MDs. The remainder of this section describes certain osteopathic research studies from the early 1900s onward. So that you can kind of throw out. But again, regardless of how one views the claimed success of osteopathic manual treatment with respect to flu, be it the Spanish flu or otherwise, at least the data that we have from the early historical record in the profession were not controlled studies. The data is retrospective and some conclusions cannot be well drawn from such information, right? So we don't necessarily know how to interpret this in a meaningful or honest way. So that lines up on some level with Dr. Still as an individual writer, noting that he didn't take a bunch of detailed notes and report those. He more or less worked from memory. Other practitioners may have been a little bit more rigorous early on in how they recorded that, but there are limitations to that. Limitations, when you say there are limitations to the thing, it does not mean it is wrong. It does mean that there are limitations. If there are strong limitations, it means it is harder to have confidence that it is right. You need to do more work to explore the boundaries of the claims being made. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is read from what I wrote with Jason Haxton. Essentially what I did was I took a look at a bunch of American, the American Journal of Osteopathy and I think it was the AOA journal. Yeah, I don't remember the specific journals, but it's it was the JO, the Journal of Osteopathy, and then there was another one. I don't remember the proper title, but it's the Journal of Osteopathy early on, which was the first journal. So the title of the article that I wrote, and this is found on a website that is still up. What did they do with the Spanish flu? A qualitative textual analysis of reports from osteopathic physicians on treating the influenza outbreak of 1918-1919. The authors, myself, Samuel Jarman, and Jason Haxton. So to just summarize the results, when you look at those reports, there are consistent themes. So the textual analysis, you're looking at what comes up often. You're trying to find out what comes up often. Sometimes it'll be written in different ways, so the words utilized will be different, but you can put them into themes. So there are 5 themes that popped up. One of those themes is and I'll tell you this more accurately when I read it, but hands-on treatment was inconsistent. Anyways, so to read, so that if you go look at this, you can actually see that this is what was written, combined with myself and Jason Haxton. The results. In analyzing the treatment reports from the osteopathic physicians with respect to the Spanish flu, 5 themes emerged. The 5 themes are as follows. 1, bed rest. Bed rest was very consistent. So If you saw an osteopathic physician and they thought you had Spanish flu at that time, you got bed rest. 2, baths, or alcohol rubs, hot lemonade, or water to make the patient sweat. Not every report that was read suggested this, but it was common enough. So you can consider that sweating trying to work on excretory functions. The baths were for hygiene, right? When it was a bath, there was hygiene involved, but there was also the attempt to raise temperature and generally increase sweating. 3, enemas. Not everyone agreed, but it was common. There were different forms of enemas that were delivered, but the enemas, again, you're looking at, if you were to turn this into a construct, you're looking at increasing excretory function. 4, control the diet. Generally only liquid until the temperature is normal for 24 hours. What normal meant isn't necessarily reported. They weren't working on a scale. They just said normal temperature. Maybe the writers were assuming that people knew what that meant when they read it. Number 5, sorry, actually before I go on to 5, number 4, controlling the diet. It was varied in what they reported, but the most general theme, just to reiterate this, was liquid until the temperature was stabilized, and then you'd give them some solids. Theme 5, hands-on treatment of varying frequency, most consistently relaxing the spinals, focus on neck and thoracic regions, focus on organs of excretion. So when you read the reports of the hands-on methods that were applied to patients who were considered to have the Spanish flu, they were inconsistent. They talked about do it this often, do it that often, do it a different amount of frequency. So the frequency was inconsistent, which immediately means that with face validity, or something being what it says it is superficially, I can't trust this, right? It is different when one person reports it versus another. They do talk about relaxing the spinal muscles. Some of them just talked about giving a general treatment. Others spoke specifically about relaxing the spinal muscles, talking about the neck, the thoracic region, and then the organs of excretion, right? Well, okay, what are organs of excretion? Depending on how you argue that, you can talk about the skin. Then you can say, if you want to post hoc argue this, well, the baths and alcohol rubs, that was osteopathic treatment to the organs of excretion. The enemas were osteopathic treatment to the organs of excretion, right? So you can argue this in a mildly circular way. But as far as the hands-on treatment, with respect to something like face validity or superficially, is this thing doing what it says it does? Because it's so inconsistent, you can't trust it as the reason that osteopathic physicians, if they had a difference in outcome, that it was because of hands-on treatment. If osteopathic physicians actually had a difference in outcome, you would probably put it more with the first 4, so bed rest, essentially sweating people with baths, alcohol rubs, hot lemonade or hot water, enemas, and controlling the diet. If something was going to be unique to osteopathic physicians, if they actually had a difference in outcomes with Spanish flu, it would have been there, and less so with the hands-on treatment, because the hands-on treatment wasn't even reported by everybody who was reporting on what they did with respect to Spanish flu, or at the time, what was considered Spanish flu, because there's reasons to have discussion around whether or not it was the same thing in everybody. Something happened without question, but there's a reason to have discussions. There was actually one report, and I don't remember, I think it was an army hospital somewhere in Colorado, whereby one of the physicians was speaking about how there were people who had presented with what was termed Spanish flu, but in the eyes of this osteopathic physician, it was more likely something like a rhinitis, so like a stuffy nose, right? Or sometimes even, I think the physician said something about anxiety. Just somebody was a little bit worked up. They thought they had it, so they were scared, which would be understandable. If there's a pandemic going around, you might get scared. That kind of makes sense, at least superficially. So anyways, the point of this is to say that the ability to extract information and point to it with high degrees of confidence from historical osteopathic writing, especially early on, the ability to do that is low. It is hard to have high degrees of confidence in what the early practitioners said. It doesn't mean what they said was wrong. It doesn't mean what they said was incorrect. It doesn't mean what they said wasn't what they were doing. It does mean that based on how that information is presented, how it can be found, how it can be interpreted, has troubles with inculcating confidence or providing confidence to the reader. The ability to reproduce it is low, so I just can't suggest that reading historical osteopathic literature is going to make you confident that you found this thing, you named this condition, therefore you can treat it. I have spoken previously about how Dr. Still, either in his own words or in stories about him, such as the story that I related about E. E. Tucker in a previous episode, Dr. Still said, find where it's not moving, work on that, find it like an engineer, look through the body like an engineer and work on what you find. Such and such a condition is not going to present in the same way in everybody. So it's one of the reasons why reporting what an osteopathic practitioner did with respect to a named condition has high degrees of variability if they're looking for motion alteration or motion restriction, somatic dysfunction, whatever term you prefer to use. But wherever it's not moving is where you treat. And if that's how the osteopathic physician is working, then the ability to relate that to a condition is highly varied. Because the condition is considered a stable construct, your ability to collect that data and report on it is not necessarily good. So you would have to then figure out how you would generate experimentation around a more quote-unquote osteopathic approach. So you can start with the way that some of my students are starting. You know, if I choose this area of the body to work on, how often does it change other areas of the body? So you can develop a long list of things. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do this particular method to this area, and I'm going to see how often it changes these other areas in diffuse locations that I assess, and you'll get some rate. So you can start to figure out how often does treating one area affect another superficially. And then if that mechanical restriction that is occurring somewhere is relating appropriately to whatever internal process or subjective sensation that is being reported, if they're properly related, you work on the mechanics, and they should change together as long as the movement changes. So we can start to figure out a different way, but if we work backwards from condition and osteopathic treatment, you end up having problems because of how it has to be applied or how the data has to be collected. You have problems. Now, my consistent claim is osteopathy is bad at science, so osteopathy should just get better at science, and then you can start to figure out how to approach it through iterative processes. So you make a prediction, you test something, whatever you learn from that, you start from that position and go again. So the main point to reiterate or to say again is that trusting early osteopathic literature has challenges. I've given you a little bit of insight into that with respect to reports on the Spanish flu and essentially the 3 papers that I note, one including something that I wrote myself, does suggest that the ability to draw conclusions from that writing is low or has challenges at minimum. The manner in which the statistics were collected. So there is a very specific set of statistics that you'll see in some of these papers, and it's, you know, kind of reported ad hoc or sort of, you know, it variably depending on which author sent it in, which physician reported it. So the ability to aggregate that data is poor. You don't necessarily have proper sample sizes. It's not well controlled. So kind of can't trust those statistics. If you ever see the chart, there's a chart and a percentage, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. But even that has the same problem. How that data was collected, how that data was reported, how that data was analyzed after aggregation has major issues. So just keep in mind, reading old osteopathic literature can give you some information, can give you very important information, but your ability to trust its validity, aka it did what it says it did, is poor. You have to have lower levels of confidence when reading earlier osteopathic literature with respect to claims. So thank you for listening this far. Hopefully you learned something. We'll talk again soon.